allowed the woman my husband had loved for 15 years to stand at his deathbed. What brought me to that moment is the saddest story I have ever lived. I was born on a cold December morning in 1844 in the Yellow Palace on Amaliagade, Copenhagen, a house noble in name but modest in reality. My first cries echoed off painted ceilings, not marble halls. My father, Prince Christian, was not yet a king, and my mother, Louise, kept our world ordered with gentle hands and quiet faith. We were royal, yes, but never extravagant. I remember the routine: prayers in the morning, lessons at the table, the clatter of governesses' shoes on bare floors. Our tutors came and went, their voices weaving foreign words, French, English, Greek, into my childhood. Miss Thompson taught me to stitch straight lines, to play the piano softly, to bow my head and listen. I learned early that silence was safer than complaint, that a smile could smooth over disappointment, and that duty was the fabric of every day. Even as a child, I watched my mother write letters, her script careful, her eyes tired. She would tell me I must be ready, Alex, and that I belonged to Denmark but would not stay here. I believed her. I saw how every meal, every lesson, every stiff dress was a rehearsal for a stage I could not yet see. When my father was named heir to King Frederick, the air in our house changed. There were more visitors, more whispers, and the sense that I was being polished for something beyond my own wanting. In the evenings, I pressed my face to the window and watched the city lamps flicker. I wondered if I would ever be allowed to choose my own happiness. I was born into a bargain, shaped for a future that was never mine to claim. Even then, I understood that love would be a duty and that endurance would be my only inheritance. He asked for my hand in the gardens at Laeken on a September afternoon when the light was soft and nothing seemed real. The Belgian court watched from the windows, their faces pressed to the glass, waiting for the answer that would bind two countries together. I remember the feel of the ring in his palm, cool, unremarkable, heavy with what it meant. I did not tremble. I did not let my voice betray me. I had already learned that love, for someone like me, was not a choice but a duty performed in silence. The proposal was written in a letter to my mother, the words careful and distant. I was chosen for my face and my bloodline. That phrase haunted me. I read it over and over as if repeating it could make it mean something kinder. I was not blind to the world around me. The whispers had reached Copenhagen long before I arrived at Laeken. There was already a shadow trailing Albert, another woman named Nellie Clifton, her name spoken in the corridors, her laughter echoing in the rumors that crossed the channel. I knew before I ever wore his ring, before I bowed my head and said yes. My acceptance was not innocence, but resignation. I told myself I could bear it, that I could give my life to a man who had already given part of his away. My mother's letters urged me to think of Denmark, of the safety our marriage would bring. The British throne was a shield, she said, but I felt the weight of it pressing down, cold and indifferent. I stood in that gilded room, surrounded by strangers, and consented to a future built on secrets. I was 18, and I understood that my first act as a bride would be to forgive what had not yet been confessed to me. That was the beginning. That was the bargain. They dressed me in white silk and pearls and led me through the vaulted hush of St. George's Chapel on March 10th, 1863. Every step echoed with the weight of a nation's longing. I remember the smell of lilies, the coldness of the ring, the press of 1,000 eyes, none of them searching for the girl beneath the veil. I heard my name in the register, written in a hand steadier than my own, and I signed it with a flourish I did not feel. The choir sang for England, for Denmark, for the promise of peace. No one sang for me. After the vows, I took my place beside him, the Prince of Wales, my husband. The world called it a love match. The newspapers wrote of fairy tales and alliances, but I felt the distance begin before the ink on the register had dried. We left Windsor in a carriage heavy with flowers and bouquets, but our conversation was light as air, brittle with formality. I watched his hands fold and unfold in his lap, always restless. I tried to memorize the lines of his face, searching for kindness, for something that belonged to me alone. Our honeymoon was meant to last. Days of quiet together, a voyage on the royal yacht, a retreat from the world. Instead, it ended almost before it began. Within a week, illness or duty, no one told me which, called him back to London. I was left with ledgers and household lists. My name entered as a wife, but not yet a companion. I slept in rooms that smelled of new paint and sea air, listening for footsteps that never came. In the silence, I understood what I had truly married. Not a man, but an absence. A bargain carried out in public and abandoned in private. My first lesson as a bride was how to be alone, even when the world called me beloved. The winter of 1871 pressed its cold hands against our windows and would not let go. I remember the hush that settled over the house when the doctor closed the nursery door. "Typhus," he whispered, as if the word itself might infect the air. I did not leave his side. I counted the hours by the rise and fall of his fever, by the damp cloths I pressed to his brow, by the prayers I mouthed silently so as not to wake him. My own chills came and went, but I would not rest, not when duty and love were the same thing. The household ledger records those days in neat, indifferent script. Medicines administered, temperatures noted, meals untouched. But there is no column for hope, or for the dread that crept in at night when the coughing would not stop. I gave birth to Alexander John on an April morning so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. He was so small, so pale, his fingers curling around mine with a strength that seemed impossible. 4 days. That is all the world allowed me. The death notice from the General Register Office is precise. The 10th of April, 1871. The cause was pneumonia. I have read it so many times that the words have worn thin. There is no space in the official record for the sound a mother makes when she holds her child for the last time. After they took him from me, I sat in the dark and listened to the silence. I thought of all the times I had been told to compose myself, to smile for the sake of the nation, to turn grief into duty. But in those hours, I was only a mother with empty arms, and there was no audience, no court, no crown, only the ache of love that has nowhere left to go. I learned then that devotion could be a kind of suffering, that to care for others is to open yourself to loss. And still, I chose to keep loving. I chose to keep breathing, because that is what was asked of me, and because I did not know how to stop. For 38 years, I stood at the center of rooms that were never truly mine. My title changed, but the script did not. I learned to glide across ballroom floors with a smile fixed so tightly it bruised the inside of my mouth. The court circulars tracked my every appearance. The Princess of Wales attends, the Princess of Wales presides, and the real story played out in the shadows, in the ledgers, in the columns of the morning papers. I read my humiliation in print before I ever heard it from his lips. I saw Lillie Langtry's name in the Times, watched Daisy Warwick's laughter ripple across the gardens, felt Alice Keppel's perfume cling to the velvet of my own drawing room chairs. There were others, too many to count. Each one arrived with a bouquet and left with a piece of what was supposed to be mine. I became an expert in composure. I greeted them all, the actresses, the countesses, the women whose names were whispered behind gloved hands. I offered them tea, I offered them courtesy, and I offered them the only thing I had left, the dignity of being unshakable. I marked their visits in the household ledger, not as acts of jealousy, but as a record of my own endurance. If I could not be loved faithfully, I would at least be remembered for my restraint. My fury had no safe place to go. It turned inwards, calcifying into poise. I learned to speak in careful phrases, to nod at the right moments, to let my silence become its own kind of power. There were nights when the laughter from his rooms drifted up the stairs and settled over me like frost. I pressed my face to the window, the same way I had as a girl, and reminded myself that I was not born to happiness, but to duty. Every betrayal became another layer of armor. I wore my composure as a shield, not because I was weak, but because it was the only weapon left to me. I endured year after year, not out of blindness, but out of a stubborn refusal to let the world see me break. In that endurance, I found a strange, private strength, a resolve that belonged to me alone, even as everything else was taken. After Albert Victor died in January 1892, his room at Sandringham became a place suspended in time. The bed stayed made, boots lined beneath the window, brushes untouched on the dressing table. I could not bring myself to cross the threshold. The housekeepers knew nothing was to be disturbed. That room became a shrine, a quiet monument to a son lost too soon, where grief settled and refused to move on. Long before I lost him, I had already begun to lose the world to silence. In my 20s, the first signs of deafness crept in. A missed word at dinner, music fading at court, the soft blur of conversation slipping away. Doctors called it nerve deafness. They prescribed speaking tubes and ear horns, awkward devices I barely tolerated. I learned to read lips, to watch faces for meaning, but there were always gaps. Laughter and whispers drifted past me, leaving me alone even in a crowded room. The world became muffled, as if I stood behind glass. My children's voices, my husband's reassurances, all faded to memory. I became skilled at pretending, nodding, smiling, never betraying confusion. Weakness was not permitted, not at court, not at home, not even in my own mind. The silence pressed in, but I made it a companion. In that hush, I found a kind of strength, a place no one could reach or wound me further. Standing in Albert Victor's untouched room, surrounded by stillness, I realized silence was the only thing I could keep. The world outside moved on, but inside, I kept vigil for the son I could not save and the voices I could no longer hear. My grief became a discipline, my silence a shield. In that quiet, I learned to rule myself and found a strange power in enduring what could not be changed. Victoria was my shadow long before she became my nurse. From the time she could walk, she watched me, her eyes always searching for what I needed, her steps falling in line behind mine. I did not ask her to give up her life for me. I did not forbid her happiness or turn away suitors with a mother's pride. But the years passed, and the invitations faded, and the world began to speak of her as my companion, my comfort, my silent twin. I let it happen. I let her sacrifice herself quietly, day after day, until her own dreams withered into duty. She learned to read my lips as my hearing faded, sitting close at dinners, guiding me through the blur of conversation with a gentle touch on my sleeve. In the mornings, she brought me the letters I could no longer hear read aloud. At night, she sat by my bed and pressed cool cloths to my forehead when the headaches would not leave. Her handwriting filled the household ledgers. Her voice answered for me when I could not bear the noise. The palace called her a comfort. I called her my crutch. In private, guilt gnawed at me. I saw the lines deepen around her eyes, the way she folded her hands in her lap and looked away when the younger women laughed about dances and courtships. She bore it all without complaint, as I had. But I knew what it cost her. I knew what it cost me. Victoria's love was a mirror of my own, a devotion that asked for nothing, gave everything, and left both of us alone together. I gave her my loneliness as an inheritance, and I have never forgiven myself. On the 6th of May, 1910, I stood at the edge of his bed, the air thick with the smell of medicine and the hush of servants waiting for a sign. Edward's breath rattled in his chest, each exhale slower than the last. I had spent 40 years learning to hold my face still, to keep my voice even, to let my dignity do the speaking when love was not enough. But in that room, as the gas lamps flickered and the world waited for a king to die, I became something I had never been allowed to be, undisputed. They summoned Alice Keppel to his bedside. Her presence was expected, almost ritual by then. She pressed his hand, whispered comfort, wept without shame. I watched her, and I felt nothing. No anger, no jealousy, only the cold certainty that this, too, was part of the bargain I had kept all my life. The doctors looked to me, uncertain. The courtiers shifted, unsure whose grief was permitted to show. I let her stay until the moment I saw his eyes cloud. Then I said, quietly, but so that all could hear, "You must go now." My voice did not tremble. There was no need to raise it. She looked at me, startled, and for a moment, the mask slipped from us both. But I did not flinch. I had given him everything: my youth, my silence, my forgiveness, my endurance. At the end, I claimed the right to be the last. She left the room weeping. I sat beside him, took his hand, and waited for the silence to settle. That was my command, the only one I ever needed. I had learned how to disappear. In that hour, I learned how to remain. The years after his death passed quietly, one fading into the next like mist over the lawns at Sandringham. I became the Dowager Queen, a title that sounded both heavy and hollow. 15 years, 15 winters, 15 springs measured out in the slow routines of a house that no longer belonged to the world. I walked the same gravel paths each morning, my cane sinking softly into the earth, my thoughts circling the same old memories. The clocks ticked on, indifferent to loss. Victoria sat with me at breakfast, her eyes searching for purpose in the rituals we kept. Letters arrived, were answered, then set aside. The world outside the gates grew louder, faster, more impatient. But within these walls, time moved at the pace of grief. There were days when I heard nothing at all, Not the servant's footsteps, not the wind in the chestnut trees, not even my own name spoken at my shoulder. Silence had become my truest companion. I learned to read the shapes of faces, the tilt of a head, the press of a hand. I let the house grow still around me, preserving what I could. The rooms where my children laughed, the window where I once watched for his return, the small tokens of a life spent waiting. On the 20th of November, 1925, I let go. 80 years contained in a single, final breath. They wrote my passing into the ledgers, another entry among so many. I left behind the hush of Sandringham, the weight of titles, the memory of a love that survived everything but time itself. I carried his betrayals in silence, every glance and whisper pressing deeper into the marrow of my loneliness. I knew what waited behind the wedding veil, and I chose to endure. My dignity became my shield and my prison. Even now, I wonder if love is endurance or surrender, or simply the last thing I had left to give. Tell me, would you have chosen differently?